the basic course, I've explained how logic and math works in Wire. But now we're doing instancing, so the math and logic get a little different. There's also math and logic nodes that only work with collection, so there's that. Lucky for you, this stuff is really easy, so we'll go through it fast. Let's get started. When you are doing basic math operations, like subtraction and multiplications, you can either do the operation with a collection and a single value, or two collections. In this example, I am multiplying. All the values from the linear node get individually multiplied by 2. But down here, I'm multiplying the linear node with a sequence node. In this case, each index gets multiplied with a value at the same index of the other collection. In other words, index 0 of the linear node gets multiplied with index 0 of the sequence node. Index 1 of the linear node gets multiplied with index 1 of the sequence node, and so on. Logic operates in a similar way. Here I have a collection of booleans being compared with an equal node set to false. All the values in the collection of booleans are being compared against false. When I input a collection to test against, each index gets tested against its index in the opposite collection, just like the math nodes. Simple as that. Keeping on the subject of logic, you know comparators and you know how to use them, because I've taught you how to use them in the basic course. So I can keep this short and show you which comparators only work with collections. None, all, and any join the comparator party. All outputs true if all inputs are true. None outputs true if none of the inputs are true. And any outputs true if any of the inputs are true. And that's all the logic you need to know when you're working with instancing. In this example, we'll use some logic to change the color of our moving rectangles based on their height. So I'll start out with some rectangles, create an edge out of them, and I want to move them around, so I'll create a transform. Now we'll create a nice movement pattern with sine oscillators like we did in the first tutorial. One for the X, one for the Y. Move it around. Now we'll create some linear nodes to offset the phases. All right, reduce the size a little bit and the amplitude as well. Oops. Maybe play around with the linear so we can get something weird going on, some cool pattern. All right, that's nice. Now we want to render them to shape. Let's pick white, it's not very relevant, we'll change that. Now, based on their height of the rectangle, we want to change the color. So we'll take the variable, this value, because that's the y. We'll say if it's greater than 0, which basically means it's above the middle, this area over here. If it's greater, then do something. So what do we want to do? We want to switch between two colors. So let's create a switch. As soon as I connect it, the switch will instance, and because it's a Boolean, the greater produces Boolean, the switch will become a Boolean switch. Simply create a color in, or better, create two of them. First I'll set it to red, the second color, let's say blue, and now as long as the colors are above 0, it is blue, below red. And we could create some smoothing. I really like color smoothing. And now our rectangles are changing color as they pass the 0 point. Of course, you can change this. You could also combine it with the X, for example, and create a 4-way color scheme like that. Just a little real life example of how you can use logic in instancing patches. So for this example, we're going to create a quite complex patch. So it's going to take a while. Grab yourself a cup of coffee. Um, I want to have some shapes that move around randomly. I want to have automated color differences so that each instance has a slightly different color. And I want to show you another very powerful logic node when you're using instancing called within to sort of create an area in the patch where shapes get bigger and get smaller as they move out. Anyway, enough talk. Let's start with circles and a transform. I'm picking transform because I know I want to play with the scale later on, so move simply won't cut it. Now I want to create some random movement, and for this I'll use Perlin noise, and I'll use two Perlin noise nodes, one for the X and one for the Y. Like that. And pack it in, and we already have our first random movement. Of course, we want to instance it. So the Perlin noise needs some kind of offset. I'll simply use the linear node, and let's say 100 instances. Let's go big or go home. To the phase offset, I'll copy this. It helps to get like a bit weird values in here. And we are getting our messy movement already. Let's lower the size of the circle to be like even smaller than that. And now I want to lower the speed down quite a bit. And the amplitude of the X can be larger because our screen is wider than it is high. So let's scale this a bit up. Yeah, that looks good for a random movement. Next up is when the circles enter the middle, I want them to be bigger than when they're outside. So we'll take the pack, which are X and Y coordinates, and I'll check if they are within a certain limit. Cool thing is, if I input this automatically tests against a float2 value. So if the top is -1, the bottom is 1, then we want to be somewhere in between this ratio. Right? Oh, of course, our screen is wider, so we might want to increase this, like the X, let's say 8. And we can get a big array of big collection of true and falses out of that. And for this, we'll simply use a switch again, like we did in the previous example. And let's say if it's true, so if they are within, they'll have their regular scale of 1 or 100%, and outside of the center, they will be 0.5. As you can see here, as soon as they pop in, they grow. I think we can increase the X on the Perlin noise a little bit more. Yeah. All right. You can probably guess already what's next. It's adding smooth, because this is way too erratic. Let's make the smooth really slow. And you can see the dots fading in and growing back in as they go. Nice. This will be our movement pattern for this patch. Time to throw it into a shape render. Now I want to do something interesting with the colors. Let's, for now, just give it white. I want you to be able to have a color and then create color variations by using the random node. So let's start with just a simple color. This is something that the user could pick. And as you know, if you just pick, let's pick a color, it's a float 4. So the first value is the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel, and then the alpha channel. So what I want to do is I want to add and subtract to that randomly. So I will create a random node, set it to a float 4 because that's what we're having, and we're adding these together. Right, so we're going to add a random color, so to speak, to the existing color. I don't want to change the alpha, so I'll set this to 0. So yeah, whatever alpha you pick here, this is the alpha slider. I want the user to have control over that. The values are way too large because adding, let's say, having here like a 0.48 for the red channel, adding 0.5 to that will already be full red. So that's the values are too large. So let's say something like minus 0.1, minus 0.2, minus 0.2, minus 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. Now we're all having the same color. We're going to expand on this later on. And if I trigger it, I have small variations upon the original purple color. Right? So the color variation part works. Now I want to instance it. So we're working with 100 instances, so I want to have 100 colors, and I want to have 100 random values. Let's see how that looks. All right. Now each color has its own slight variation to it. Now we want to add some control over this. So I want to give the user a float, and I want to, let's say, run from -1 to 1. That's the most extreme you could add to a color. Anything beyond that is 1. But I need a float 4. There are no float 4 sliders, so there's just a float in. So I'll pack it together to create a float 4. So this value will go into the pack. And the W here would be the alpha, so we can keep that to 0. Now, a little trick we can do here is create the onChange node. So whenever the value changes, this is going to send out the float 4. But we don't care about the float 4. We care about it. This is an event flow which can trigger the random node. So each time we pull the slider, we get a new color, right? So we don't have to put in a trigger button or something like that. Now this will be our max value. We can also pull that from the onChange. This will be our max value, but we also need our minus value, which is just the opposite. So what we could do is get a negate, which turns any positive value into a negative value and negative value into a positive value, and put it into the minus. And now we have color shifts, but I think the pack was not instanced. So that was a mistake on my part. And now if we go all the way up to 1, we get a huge color variation. And if we go down, let's say 0.1, we get this really subtle color change. And you can still, the alpha is still untouched. So that's cool. I want to finish this patch up. Normally it would just this be it, but I want to finish this one off. So let's say we're creating a blur. We're adding a little blur to it. I'll keep these values. No, we can blur a little bit more. Yeah, make them really vague. I want them to be like auras. We'll pick a video mixer. I want to have 4 channels. I want to have 1 channel for the hub because I like to keep my patches clean. Hub does nothing. It's just a patch routing option. I want to have my original signal on top. I want to have the blur around it. Might need to lower this one a little bit. Yeah, that's fine. I want to have a solid color in the back. I just want to have a black background for this. So that works nicely. And next I want to add a transform. And then the transform is going back into the video mixer with a video, so we get video feedback. Let's lower this one a little bit, up the quality of the blur. So now we're just playing. All right, so we get the traces from the circles from the video feedback, and I'm going to increase the scale a tiny bit. So we get this. That's even too much. So I want to have like 1.01, 1.01, and play with these values. Until we get a nice result. That's pretty cool. Decrease the opacity a little bit more. And now we can play with stuff like the Perlin noise, increase the amplitude. And we have ourselves quite a cool visual patch. Just some patching from front to end, using some mathematics with instancing, with the add, combining two collections, showing some logic with the within nodes. So yeah, this is pretty well rounded. If you understand what I'm doing here, you are very well on your way to becoming an instancing pro.